Hey everybody, I'm Elysia Buss, host of Horsepower Empowerment through Connection, and today I have the great honor of getting to connect with Veronica Lac, who is the founder of the Herd Institute, which is this incredible facility down in Orlando, Florida. Veronica is originally from England, and she has come here and she works with horses, and oh my goodness gracious, one of the great things that I love so much about what she's created down at the Herd Institute is that it's accredited. So they get to work with horses on empirically based information and research, and gosh, there's so much more. And I could go on and on and on about her, but I think I'm going to let her take the reins and tell you more about that and the Human Equine Relational Development Institute, which is what HERD stands for. So Veronica, thank you so much for being here today on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
It's lovely to connect with you because we only met fairly recently. And yeah, I'm honored to be included in your interviews that you've been doing.
Thank you very much. So Veronica, what first brought you to horses?
I've always loved horses, like ever since I was a kid. And it wasn't until I think I just graduated from my master's program. And so I came late to horses in lots of ways. But I graduated from my master's program and decided to treat myself to a bunch of horseback riding lessons.
Nice.
And, I'd spent 5 years up until that point studying kind of therapy and, somatic based approaches and kind of really getting in touch with body process and all of that stuff. And in the first 30 minutes of this horseback riding lesson, everything that I'd been working on in my personal therapy as part of my training showed up. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. I wonder if anybody does therapy and horses combined. And so I started researching and found, this incredible world of equine facilitated therapy. And so that's kind of how I entered into this industry. But, prior to that.
England? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, because I couldn't remember when you came to America.
Yeah, we've been here about 10 years. So, okay. It was a while back. And what happened was, I started talking to my friends and I was saying, have you heard about kind of people combining horses with therapy? And back then in the UK, there was very, very little. And so I was looking online and I discovered the Gestalt Equine Institute of the Rockies. And I contacted the trainers there and I said, do you guys ever teach internationally? And they said, no, we haven't done so far, but if you're interested in, organizing a workshop, then, we'd be open to doing that. So I spent a year basically trying to figure out how I could bring them over to the UK, and eventually kind of organized this 3-day workshop, invited all my friends to it, begged them to come so that so that I could make it work. I had like about 10 people staying in my house just to cut costs
like a
down.
nice party.
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome. And that weekend basically changed the whole direction of my journey as a therapist, because I realized that there was so much that could be done with horses that we couldn't even begin to touch on in room-based counseling.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but prior to that, I kind of, as a kid, I'd, had a few riding lessons, but it was not what I imagined it would be. I had this romantic idea of being able to kind of, be at one with my pony and bareback riding and all this kind of stuff. And actually what it turned out to be was my instructor shouting at me to kick harder at this poor little pony that I really didn't want to, I was going to say abuse, but yeah, I didn't want to kind of do the old pony club kick and use a crop and make him go when he clearly didn't want to. And
Yeah.
so a lot of that kind of rubbed up against some cultural values and also some personal, philosophies about kind of how we treat other beings. And so I was just like, even at the age of kind of 10 or whatever it was, at the time, I was like, no, I don't think so. It's not for me. And then I spent a few years kind of volunteering at therapeutic riding facilities and that kind of stuff. So I still had some contact with horses. And then I had a big break until kind of that moment that I described about, that first horseback riding lesson. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. And so did you have your own horses when you were in England?
I had a lease on a little, makes me cry thinking about him. It was the hardest thing about leaving the UK, was leaving him behind. Yeah, so a little black fell pony.
Oh my gosh, they're so cute.
They're like little mini Frisians.
Yeah, that's what the Queen of England has, is the little fell ponies.
Yeah. So his name was Rupert, and I leased him for a couple of years. And I used to call him my little goth rock pony. And he was just amazing. So, he was my first love in terms of real kind of connection with a horse.
Yeah.
In my adult life, I think, I kind of swooned over other people's horses as a kid and whatever. But, in terms of having a real relationship for myself with another horse, he was the one. Yeah. And so, when we moved, I'd been leasing him for a couple of years at that point, and that was the toughest thing. Yeah.
Do you ever go back to visit him, or has he passed?
Well, sadly, about a year after we moved, he was sold, and kind of I lost contact at that point. So I never got to go back to visit him.
I'm sorry, that's hard.
Yeah.
Do you have your own horses now?
I do. So I have 3.
Busy lady.
Yes. I'm very lucky to have my horses at home with me.
Nice.
And so I have 2 mares and a gelding, all quarter horses. All of them have special needs of some kind.
Oh, interesting.
And they are the heart of the Herd Institute. So they are my co-teachers when students come, and they offer, a wealth of wisdom that I couldn't possibly offer on my own.
That's beautiful. Can you share some of the profound stories of your experience partnering with your horses and that you've seen with some of the people you've been working with?
Sure. So working with, I spent a long time kind of working with lots of different populations. So I've been a therapeutic riding instructor. I've worked, with residential programs, created residential programs. I've kind of partnered with eating disorder clinics and, developed veterans programs. So there's a really wide range of client populations that I've had the privilege of being able to introduce horses to. And, when you say, can I pick one story? I don't know if I want to talk about
a few stories.
It's more about like, it's more kind of, do I want to talk about experiences of my own with my horses, or whether I want to talk about kind of, what I've witnessed. And I think,
any and all are totally welcome. It's just that the power of horses is what's so beautiful, and that we're bringing more to light for the people out there that have never had, like the experience of horses.
Well, I'll talk about one of my, I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but he really was one of my favorites. therapeutic riding students when I was working at a center in Ohio. So I was in Ohio for 5 years, and I taught this kid every week for 5 years. And he was 5 when we first started, and non-verbal autistic kid who had really kind of set routines and was very unpredictable in terms of his responses to sensory input.
Okay.
And so one of the things that he used to do was he'd arrive, and we had kind of like the hallway the aisle that led into the barn, and then there were some stairs that went up to a gallery area. And so his routine was that he would arrive at the barn, run upstairs, run around the table that was up in the lounge area 3 times in each direction, always the same thing. And then he would run downstairs and run up to me and, wait to be let in. And so there was one day he came in and he did his usual routine. He ran upstairs, ran around 3 times each direction, came back down. He ran up to me and he grabbed my face and pulled me down to him and sniffed my face. And so his dad was watching this and he was like, no, don't do that. And I was like, no, it's okay. Because I was like, this is interesting. I don't know what this is about. And so he sniffed my face and, looked at me and let go. And I was like, okay, hi. I had no idea what that was about. Every week for about 6 months, he probably did this same routine. Run in, run upstairs, run around the table, come downstairs, grab my face and sniff me. And it wasn't until there was one day when I was walking with him into the arena and I kind of led him towards his horse that I realized what he was doing. Because every time that we did this, he would go up and his horse would stretch his neck out and sniff him.
Aww.
And so from that, it was the first time that his dad had said to me afterwards, and when I made the connection, and I said, oh, so this is what happened today. And so I said to him, is this what you're doing when you're sniffing me? And he just giggled. He didn't say anything, but he just giggled. And so I said to his dad, this is what happened today. And he was like, oh, that's amazing. That's the first time that he actually made a connection between what someone else does as a greeting that he can take on for himself. And so I just thought that was so powerful, and all of it was completely nonverbal. And just the fact that he felt safe enough to do that with me. And I'm kind of frustrated with myself that it took so long for me to figure out what it was that he was doing. But I'm really glad that I went with his desire to sniff my face, which was not always pleasant, but
all your clients to sniff your face. That's so weird.
Yeah, I know.
But I just thought we were reading the barn, everybody. It's one of our new protocols. We just have to smell each other's faces, and
yeah, exactly. And so I went to China a few years ago. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, to a psychology conference, and I was talking about equine facilitated therapy, and I started my presentation by saying, every morning I wake up and I go to my office and I greet my colleagues by sniffing them.
And everybody just kind of looks at you. They're like, so interesting.
But that's basically what I do.
Yeah, it's that's so funny. And I mean, like the scent of horses, though. It's just, oh God, there's something about the scent of horses that's just the best smell in the world.
Yeah, and it's been really hard during the pandemic for people, who haven't been able to come out to the barn. A lot of clients are really struggling because they're missing that smell. And so what I've been doing is getting like bandanas and rubbing them on the horses and putting them in Ziploc bags and sending them to my clients.
That's so clever.
So that they can have some kind of transitional object of, like, you know, being able to open up the bag and sniff it while we are working virtually, to be able to say, okay, so, you know, remember that time when Reba came and stood behind you, you know, and you turned around and sniffed her neck, you know, you can kind of get that sense of that experience again by opening up that Ziploc bag. So
no, that's super clever with sensory integration. And out of all the people I've talked to, you're the first person that's told me anything like that. So that's really cool. Yeah, the thesis I wrote was about multiple intelligence theory and sensory processing and all of that, and how it helps autistic students. And yeah, so I'm always really excited when people integrate more and more with the sensory process. Yeah, did you want to share one of your own personal stories with your horses before we moved on, or?
Yeah, sure. I have many.
Or you have many.
I think.
How do I
think the most profound one for me was kind of about just over a year ago. And I may cry when I tell you the story, but that's okay.
It's completely acceptable.
So and I talk about this in my book too, that was published recently. But my grandma died in March last year, and she was based out in California. And the day after she died, I'd been in the hospital with her I'd stayed in the hospital with her for about 2 weeks. And the day after she died, or the evening, I got the red eye back to Florida because I had to be back home for something, and before flying back again for the funeral. But I got the red eye back, and so I got home, you know, got an Uber from the airport, back when Ubers were okay to use. And I got out of the car, had my little roller bag, you know, and opened the gate to our driveway. I've got a really long driveway, and on one side is one of the paddocks. And just as I arrived, Sarah, who's my program manager, who'd been looking after the horses while I was away, she'd just come out to start feeding them. And all three of them heard me rattling the gate and looked across. And Arrow, who's my gelding, and Cheyenne, one of the mares, kind of looked over, saw me, and then, you know, redirected their focus on Sarah, who's dishing out food. Reba, who is my heart horse, she's my little chestnut mare. She heard the gate, looked over and saw me, and kind of paused, and then just galloped down the paddock towards me. And I'm not entirely sure, kind of, it's a little bit foggy in my head of what happened, but somehow I made my way through the gate, and I was standing by the fence, and she came galloping down and just stood at the fence, stretched her neck over as far as she possibly could, and rested her head on my shoulders.
Aww.
And just stood there with me. I don't know for how long, a couple of minutes. I mean, it felt, you know, kind of the rest of the world kind of faded away a little bit at the time.
Yeah.
And she just stood there and hung out with me. And until I was ready, and I kind of sniffed, gave her a hug, sniffed on it, and said, "I'm okay." And she took a couple of steps back and looked at me, and I said, "I'm going to be okay." And we walked, her on one side of the fence and me on the other, with my little suitcase, down the driveway. And we got to the end of the driveway, and she came back over to the fence and sniffed me, and then walked off and went and had a breakfast.
That's beautiful.
And there's something about that interaction that just really stayed with me, because somehow she knew that I needed that support, and also knowing her in the way that I do, I also know that it was something about her needing to know that I would be okay.
Yeah.
You know, so there was a mutuality in that in that moment I felt, you know, that she was offering me support, but it wasn't just about that. It was also to check in, to make sure that, you know, that she needed to know that I would be okay, not for her to make it okay for me. You know?
Yeah, I understand. It's
Yeah.
really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us.
Sure.
Horses.
Yeah.
They truly are special. Now, was she the first one that you had at the Herd Institute?
Yes, she was. So the funny thing about Reba is that when I started looking to buy a horse, and she's the first horse that I've ever bought, because after having to leave Rupert in the UK, I kind of went through this phase of like, you know, I could lease another horse, but I didn't want to have to go through that process again of having to leave them behind. And my husband's work basically means that we've relocated a lot in the past few years. So we've been in the States for almost 10 years, but we've lived in, this is our fourth, you know, relocation.
Wow, that's a lot of moving in 10 years.
Lot. Yeah, it's been a lot of, you know, uprooting and starting again. And so I didn't want to be in that same position where I had to leave, you know, a horse behind. So I was really clear about what I was looking for in my equine partner. I was at that point kind of starting to build up my practice, starting to really kind of immerse myself a lot more into you know, equine facilitated work, both kind of therapeutic riding and EFP and EFL. And so I was pretty specific about the feel of the connection that I was looking for. Like my at the time I was taking lessons at a hunter jumper facility. And, you know, my trainer kept asking me, well, what do you want? You know, I'm like, I want a horse that I can connect with. And she was just like, what does that mean? You know, what exactly are you looking for? Do you want, you know, like she was looking for me to answer in terms of, I want them to be 15 hands. I want them to be, you know, this color. I want them to be whatever, you know, to have had this kind of experience, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, so she'd been with me on a couple of trips to look at potential horses, and, you know, within 2 seconds I'm like, nope. And she's like, you haven't even, you know, sat on them yet. And I said, it's not about that. And so Reba was actually the 25th horse that I went to see.
Wow, that's awesome. That's
so when I say I was being
so much respect for that.
When I was being specific, I was really being specific.
No, that's awesome.
And so she was the 25th horse I went to see. By this point, my trainer had given up on me.
She's like, go find somebody else that like go with you to see horses.
She was just like, I'm not coming with you, which is totally understandable. And so I drove up to this place in the middle of nowhere I was living in Virginia at the time. And so this was just across the border in Pennsylvania, I want to say. Is that right? Yeah. So I walked into the barn, and she was standing in the like cross ties in the barn aisle. And the second I laid eyes on her, I knew. You know, I just knew that she was the one. And I couldn't explain to my trainer why she was the one, because her background was she's been a brood mare, she'd been a kid's like trail horse, she'd done some cutting, she'd done some reining, never set foot in a hunter jumper environment, and certainly hadn't done any dressage, which is what I was kind of wanting to do. And so when she stepped off the trailer, my trainer literally turned to me and said, "What is that?" Because she's this little 15-hand chestnut mare, and she stepped off the trailer with like Western braided tail, looking nothing like any of the tall, glamorous thoroughbreds warm bloods and whatever that were in the barn. And so yeah, my trainer was literally like, what is that, and what are you doing?
That's
like,
so funny.
She was the one.
She's my horse. That's just what it is. Yeah.
And I found it really interesting that like the whole process of that, because it really kind of highlighted people's assumptions about all kinds of things, like when people were asking me what kind of horse do you want, and they were expecting me to name a breed, they were expecting me to name some experience. And for me, it really was about kind of just stepping into that connection and, feeling my way to that, rather than having a preconceived notion of what, this horse should be. And I think that because of that experience, it's really informed kind of how I work, with my horses in general, but also with people, and how I teach. Because I don't think that there's enough space in our industry sometimes to consider meeting people where they're at, without holding a whole bunch of assumptions before we even step into that space.
I agree. Yeah. Speaking of which, what was it like coming into the industry as an immigrant, and like an immigrant and like a person of color, like that, and how it might have been different in England versus here?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you asked that, because I'm in the process of writing a book right now. And the title of it is called "Obviously I'm Not From Here."
I love it.
Part of that is because my experience of being in the States is that the second that I open my mouth, people are distracted by my accent, and they're distracted by what I get a lot, of comments of I don't sound how I look.
Ah, interesting.
So, and in fairness, this, kind of, there are differences depending on where I am in the country, but I've traveled a lot around the country. And it's fair to say that, if I'm standing in front of a group of people and I'm presenting on something, usually within our industry, I'm one of the, most often the only person of color, if not, there might be one or two others, but not many.
Yeah.
And, my experience is that if I stand up in a group like that and I don't name that confusion by saying, obviously I'm not from here, and give them something to hang that confusion on, I've already lost their attention.
Fascinating.
And so, it's a process of kind of claiming that, yeah, I get that I'm different, and I'm aware that causes some kind of reaction, but also that we can embrace that, and claim it, and add to add a different perspective rather to what it is that we are all doing. So it kind of, my experience of being a person of color in the States is very different to back home in the UK, because, back home, for one thing, I'm not, there was a bit of a transition for me coming to the States in terms of being labeled as Asian, because that's not a term that we use in the UK.
Interesting.
In the UK, I'm Chinese. I identify myself as a British Chinese woman in the UK. Here, I'm a British Asian woman. For a time, I was living in Ohio in a very homogenous kind of environment where every single day I would get faced with the same questions of, oh, but where are you from? You speak funny. So it's been a process for me to kind of reclaim my difference and celebrate my difference. Knowing that it's impossible for other people to not see the difference.
Yeah. In different parts, like I've been through Ohio, and at least the parts that I went through is definitely a very like homogenous, place, and very singular in its cultural aspects. And like in Seattle, we have the Chinese New Year, and like it's celebrated. I mean, Chinese New Year is everywhere around the world, obviously, but like in Seattle, Washington State, like it's a big deal. Like, and we have a lot of fun with it. And when you're in a place where you don't have very many cultural differences, I imagine that would have been like kind of an interesting experience to celebrate your own culture in a place that was so singular in its perspectives.
And it's interesting because being within the equine industry, I've very recently met one other Asian woman, but up until kind of a few weeks ago, I've only ever known one other person who she doesn't do the work anymore, but I trained with her in doing equine therapy. And so what's been difficult, it's, I situate myself as British, because that's culturally kind of what I'm familiar with. And also I have my Chinese heritage.
Right.
And I've been, and I wasn't born in the UK. I moved there when I was young. So, I have roots in Hong Kong as well. And so for me, I kind of experience myself as very transnational. So when you use the word immigrant, that almost doesn't fit either in terms of, I am technically.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I was looking at it, was just technically like you lived in England and now you live.
And so what interests me in that is how I identify myself is always different. So how others identify me in this country. So that's kind of like another layer of that process of when you say what's it like, it's quite confusing is what it's like. And it can be quite isolating.
Yeah, I was thinking of it as because like in politics right now, there's a lot of conversation going on about immigration. And so that's kind of more of what I was looking at, just like if politically that had there been some spillover from that aspect.
Well, right now, because of COVID, yeah, absolutely. I've experienced a lot more overt racism.
Yeah.
Because of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I haven't experienced that specific, to COVID within the equine industry. But that's
happy to hear that.
I imagine though that part of that is because we've been, on lockdown, and I don't know if I was out and about at different barns, and I don't know. Like,
interesting.
It's it's been an interesting experience to kind of notice my own sense of safety out and about, that, you know, during the pandemic, that's been different to how safe I felt previously.
Yeah.
You know, there's an added element of being watchful for people spitting at me on the streets, for example.
Oh,
you know.
I'm sorry. That sounds awful. I'm sorry that even has to be a consideration for you, or for anyone for that matter, because that's not acceptable for people to be treated that way anywhere at any time.
I was joking around with Jake LaRue recently, and I was saying, you know, he was talking about people being getting abused for wearing masks and stuff, and I said, I have the perfect response ready for when that happens for me, because I can turn around and say, I'm a doctor from China and this is for my protection. Would you like me to take it off? I am a doctor, just not a medical one, so I'm not lying.
Right, but they won't ask you about the difference. Sometimes assumptions play in our favor.
Yeah, and I am Chinese, so I'm not lying.
That's
but
funny.
The fact that we have to think about that, though.
I know, it's ridiculous. That's just. So a long time ago, I read an article about how the equine therapy and learning was, there were more facilities that were opening in China. And you said you've gone over to China. And did you go to participate in any of those like activities at the facilities, or was it to visit like family and friends, or do you know anything about that movement that's happening in China?
That's a great question. So there's so many things I could share about that. I didn't on that trip, but I know that there are a lot of new facilities popping up all across Southeast Asia, actually, not just China. And the trip that I went on actually was organized by one of my mentors at my through my doctorate program. And this professor of mine has been kind of organizing conferences on existential psychology in China for probably the last 10 years. And so he invited students to go with him to teach on this trip. And I think that the reason I'm kind of saying this is because there's a correlation here, in that my experience of how Western ideas and concepts get translated into other countries is that it's almost like a colonization process, where we take what we have in the West and carry it across and just dump it, and it's the responsibility of the people in that culture to then learn it and do it right according to our standards in the West.
That doesn't seem like very culturally respectful.
And it's not, and it hasn't been. Historically, it really hasn't been, right? And this happens a lot. So certainly within psychology, certainly within the equine industry, there's this double bind that happens where people, so I'm going to talk about China specifically, people in China are kind of looking to see what we can learn from the West. And so they say, oh, let's invite, these people to come over and teach us some stuff. Then what happens is that, they bring the people over, they teach, but it doesn't quite fit. And so what gets set up then is that the culture that is inviting this new knowledge into then ends up feeling as though they've done it wrong. And that feeling is confirmed by the people who are teaching in a way that isn't culturally sensitive to where they are bringing the information to, right?
Important thing to be aware of.
So what I loved about this particular trip that I went on with my professor was that he was very, very clear right at the beginning that the purpose of the trip wasn't about us as Westerners going into China to teach them about Western thinking. Instead, it was about going into an environment and sharing our knowledge and finding a way to learn from the indigenous population of what might work for them and what we might learn from them. And I think that within the equine industry, and I talk a bit about this again in my latest book, is, you know, there was this moment when I was doing my PhD where I suddenly kind of thought, what if everything that I know about being with horses is based on a white man's perspective? Because that is all I've been taught. Because the history of my culture, you know, Chinese have a long history of relationship with horses.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Right. And so, but I hadn't been taught any of that because of where I did my learning.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Right. So it completely blew my mind. I was just like, oh, well, what if, I mean, do horses have cultures? Do horses behave differently in different countries? Do they have different languages based in different countries? Or are we assuming that they all speak the same because they're the same species? I mean, we're all human, but we don't all communicate in the same way. So there must be some cultural differences, but none of that is questioned.
It's fascinating as a concept.
Like I went down a big, deep rabbit hole with that one.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's, you know, but that's a very long-winded kind of answer to what my experience is of being different, you know.
Yeah. No, thank you for all of that. Industry. No, I really appreciate it. It's different than the other interviews that we've gotten to have. I love getting to how you pulled in like the cultural aspect of things, and that's great. I love that so much. And then I want to be respectful of your time.
Yes.
How much more do we have?
Maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. So I just wanted to
actually, no, maybe 5 minutes.
Okay. So briefly, with our 5 minutes, we can always potentially do a second one later on. It's totally fine. And all of the information presented today was very important, and I'm very grateful that you brought it forward. Can you touch briefly on what you do at the Herd Institute?
Yeah, absolutely. So we run 2 separate programs. One is for equine facilitated psychotherapy, and that's for licensed mental health practitioners. The program is accredited by the National Board of Certified Counsellors. It's pending accreditation from the National Association of Social Workers, and it is accredited through the APA through Division 32. And they co-sponsor the accreditation for the program for psychologists. So that program we've actually recently revamped
nice,
to make it more accessible and affordable. So we run it as a hybrid model where we have 6 online modules that also include 6 live webinars and then 2 5-day practicums based in Orlando. My aim is to grow the program so that we can take those practicums on the road as well to make it even more accessible for people. Fantastic. But at the moment, you know, with COVID and the fact that I'm in Florida and there are certain travel restrictions, you know, travel is just a little bit more difficult. So that was part of the impetus of revamping the program, but also kind of I've been wanting to make it more accessible and affordable. So the other program that we run is the Equine Facilitated Learning Certification. And that is also a hybrid model. We have 3 modules, 2 of them are online, and then 1 is in person, is a 3-day workshop that's in person that ties in all the learning from the online components. And that one is aimed at educators, equine specialists, coaches, basically anybody who wants to work with horses in a capacity where you can help people learn more about themselves that isn't a therapy context. So we're very, very clear on scope of practice in terms of, which is which.
Yes, I appreciate that delineation.
Yeah. So those are the 2 main programs that we have. We also have a bunch of stuff online, like mini courses. I recently launched a herd virtual masterclass. So because of COVID, a lot of people were struggling to kind of continue services with their clients. And so I put together a little mini course on how to kind of incorporate virtual work with the horses.
Which is so fantastic, because lots of people are struggling with that, to be certain.
Yeah, so we have that's available on our online learning platform, and we are in the process of developing a couple of other programs that are going to be online mini courses, and as and when we're able to open up a little bit more, kind of translate that into more of the in-person stuff as well.
Fantastic. And what's the name of the book that you just published?
It's not about the activity. So, talking about how important it is to stay with the process rather than step-by-step instructions of how to do something, and attending to the relationship. And that's available on Amazon. It's also available from our website. And I also published another book 3 years ago that is more about the herd approach to equine facilitated work. And
Excellent.
you can find that on the website as well.
And so we'll have a description of all these things and links so that you can easily find Veronica and the Herd Institute and her books and all these amazing opportunities that she and her team have available for you in Orlando, Florida, and online. And soon, hopefully, other places as well. Well, Veronica, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you and everything that you're doing to make the world a better place, and your team and your wonderful horses and your candor and everything that you've shared today. So
thank you. It's been a joy to connect with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'm sure I'll talk to you soon. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks. Until next time.